Isn't a backup plan for most places. It used to be, in a pre-globalized world where we had to be a lot more self-sufficient, that in agriculture, fertilizer came from what was on hand, and so we co-located animal and plant agriculture in order to access the manure. But with globalization, we've all focused on specializing. And so we now grow our cash crops in places with the perfect weather and the perfect soil, and anything else gets moved further and further away. So what you're looking at the left is row crop, and on the right is where the beef is. You'll notice that in most situations, these are no longer co-located. There are a couple exceptions. Wisconsin, Iowa, eastern Nebraska. Dairy country. They're still co-located. They're still an option. But for everyone else, you're talking about some serious shipping. And for everyone else in the world, this split is usually not in the same country anymore. So you do something to the phosphate supply chain system, and all of a sudden you lose one of your nutrients. Final fertilizer component is phosphate. Comes from the blue, goes to the red, which means it's a China story. African swine fever get you a little nervous sometimes? So the Chinese 3 years ago had the world's largest ever outbreak. And since then, since culling about 2/3 of the herd, they haven't had a single case. The way the lab testing works here is you take your sample, you send it to a lab. When they get the results, what do? They call you. Maybe they email you. That's not how it works in China. In China, once you have your test kit, you send in your sample, the sample results go to the CCP. And then the CCP tells you if you have a positive case or not. So no positive cases in 3 years. More likely, there's already a low-level raging epidemic throughout the entire system. And considering the general breakdown in policy that we're seeing across China, I don't think it's going to be quiet much longer. We can look indirectly to see how the Chinese are anticipating this. They've stopped exports of phosphate for the most part, because they know if they lose pork again, the only crop that they can control is rice, the only one that's culturally significant. And rice is the most phosphate-hungry crop that humans grow. So they've stopped exports. For food security reasons. Makes sense. That was the world's largest supplier. This is row crop in Africa in 1950. And anything that is in purple or blue, 40% or less of the land is under crop. And in a pre-industrial system, this is what you would expect. You only grow food on the good land. You just don't get a return at all on the marginal land. But with globalization, we introduced pesticides and fertilizers and finance and machinery, and this is what they looked 50 years later. Anything that isn't orange or red is 40% or more is under crop. And the continent saw an increase in food output by a factor of 5 because of industrialized inputs. Now do that in reverse, because that's where we're heading starting later this year. This is a calorie map. Grain and soy-based calories. Blues and dark greens, those are the world's major producers and exporters. Everyone else is a net importer. And in a world where the fertilizer supply chain system breaks down, these are the countries looking at least a 40% reduction in their ability to grow the crop in the first place. This is a multi-continental famine. Now, for those of you in ag, which is all of you, you're going to try to feed the world because our supply chain system, for the most part, is not interrupted. You're going to fail, and you're going to feel bad about it because we're talking, this is a billion people starving to death. But then you're going to look at your bank accounts, and you're probably going to get over it real fast. So here are our 3 main nutrients: nitrogen, phosphate, potash. The big number on the left is the percent that we import. And you'll notice that for nitrogen and phosphate, we're largely self-sufficient. Now down at the bottom there, potash, that's our weak point. We import most of our potash. But most of it comes from Canada. So, they are good for something. This little chunk, these little slivers,